What's that chorus? What's the
Um,
phrase?
Yo creo, I believe.
Oh, oh, I agree. I believe.
Yeah. So Merton, there's two accounts that I found anyway. One is in the Intimate Merton, which is a more of a journal entry
Mm-hmm.
from closer to the time of his visit to Havana,
Mm-hmm.
after his baptism, but not that much after. And he's sort of in this no man's land of, now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Feeling a sense of a calling, but not knowing how to name it. And in Seven Story Mountain, he recalls it a little bit differently. So I went with uh, the journal entry from the Intimate Merton,
Mm.
and he's in this church in Havana, and the doors are open to the street, and that's really a profound part to the story. That the
Yeah.
doors of the church are not closed, but open to the street, and the sounds of the street are coming in. But there's a choir director with a children's choir, and they're singing Yo Creu. Like, I'm sure it
Uh,
was probably more the creed. That's
yeah.
probably what they're.
Yeah.
But I just took the one line,
Right.
I believe, because I feel like he's at that fresh. He's at that fresh conversion point
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you get these these waves of I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and so I thought I'd put that there because it's not just I believe that he's catching. He's saying because in no place. Well, that's a pretty interesting intuition for someone who's, I don't know,
Yeah.
26 or something.
It is. No, it is. It is. I think of this too, like this, is that I'm thinking of Shunru Suzuki's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and how to have a beginner's mind. Because I think what happens when we have understanding this, or this piece of the story, is that um, it's like a person is kind of taken off guard in being intimately accessed in a way they don't understand by what they don't understand. But they realize that what's accessing them in this way they can't comprehend, it's self-evident that without it their life makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like you tasted that, which makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And and in the moment of the tasting, not only is there the purity of the original awakening to it, there's also the original purity of the yes to it and recognizing it. So not only do you not understand what's accessing you and how it accessing you, you don't understand what you're saying yes to. But it's the only answer is yes. Like you are a yes. Like you're like awakened to this yes. And then once that yes kind of just echoes on within you. See, then later on, like even the variation of the same story in Seven Story Mountain,
Mm-hmm.
the ego that was transcended in this moment starts reflecting on it. And it starts, in a way, it can momentarily lose the purity of it, in its reflections on it, like trying to sort it out and comprehend it.
Right. Yeah.
But there's another way that there's a reflective consciousness that is illumined by the purity of that original vision. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
some of Merton's deep insights in his writings are kind of these kind of luminous immediacy of this matured awareness that doesn't cloud over this, but kind of echoes in everything he says. That's kind of how
Mm-hmm.
I see it. Really, that makes sense in a
Yeah.
way. But we can't help ourselves. We're disoriented, you know. But then as we sort it out, we don't give in to the temptation to circle back around and name it and put everything back in the cubby holes again,
Mm-hmm.
and just stay there. The mind, that the reflective mind can be illumined by this awareness that's not reducible to explanations and can bear witness to it. And when we talk out of that, it
Mm-hmm.
communicates itself when we talk out of that. And so, anyway, yeah, it's a key point in Mert.
Yeah, and another thing I think too is that we touch on the other aspect is that we can sort of become addicted to our spiritual experiences and
That's
we
right.
like to relay them, and we like to talk, and there's nothing wrong with relaying them or talking about them, but something you point out in the song is on the second level, which is something Merton talks about in New Seeds of Contemplation in his chapter The Wrong Flame, where he sort of warns to use wisdom as we're having these
Yes.
experiences, but it's not the wisdom that where you are mincing it apart and deconstructing it with your
That's right.
cerebral mind. It's this other place where you can almost never grow past those initial flame, like those initial moments of elation, really.
That's right. Yes, how I put it, because this is a subtle point really about identity and how we use language and what spiritual language is, and is that how I put it is that we say, notice that if someone you don't know very well, how easy it is to say a lot about them. Let me tell you about so and so. But if it's someone you've loved very, very deeply for a long time, you hardly know what to say that would do justice to what you know. And anything you could say wouldn't be what you know because you can't say it. And your heart breaks when you try. Now, the heart breaking when we try to say it is the primal knowledge itself. This disarms us. It liberates us from possessiveness of heart because it's not for the having. It gives itself. But then what happens is that the self then tries to have the moment that transcended having by explaining it or defining it, or wants to walk around with it. And like you say, that's up to a point, that's okay. But if you really look at it, you see at the hidden center of the moment, the point vierge, the hidden center of the moment wasn't a moment in which you were there to have anything. It was there where you were laid bare in a kind of purity of presence that was prior to and beyond having anything. And so instead of either or, you can then be in the purity of it, but then find the word that you don't have so much, but they do allow you to convey something of it. The loving word, the vulnerable word, the poetic word, the sincere word. They all carry the cadences of in some way reflecting upon and having some semblance of something. It's not for the having. Do I mean it's carried along in a certain kind of exchange, like a loving exchange. And when you read Merton slowly out loud, like you just read him or any of the mystics, you kind of get the feeling that's the language that you're in. I love Marcel saying that philosophy is a language which, from the very first sentence, begins to sing with its own music. And spirituality is that language too. It sings, and this is the language that it sings with. And
that was one of the reasons why I loved working with Merton's material so much. Like as a songwriter, composer, he had this way. He was always writing, but somehow, even though he was always writing, there's a silence to his words.
That's right. That's right. That's really true. And that's why I think when we read him, we quite naturally come to these resting places. You just can't go on. And you feel the purpose of the language is to bring us to that resting place. Thomas Merton once said in the monastery that it was all silence, that we didn't talk to each other. And he was asked to give the sermon in the chapter room to the community on major feast days like Pentecost, and one of the priests would give us talk in the chapter room. And he said, I'm always humbled when I'm asked to speak in this place, because everything said here should come out of silence. And everything said here should have the effect of deepening our silence. Otherwise, it shouldn't be said. And then he said, but the world, he said, that which stands up and shouts about itself is an illusion. But that which bears witness to having been accessed by some unsayable thing is the word that touches hearts. And that's God's word, I guess. That's the teacher, I guess.